Welcome to Eleanor's world, my fellow and lovely members of the Lumos Lounge, your destination for magical stories and unforgettable journeys. Don't forget to comment the video. And for all of you that aren't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications. Thank you for joining and helping to keep the magic alive. And now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Ron's voice broke the stillness of the snowy garden. Am I interrupting something? He asked, his tone sharp and accusing. Harry and Hermione stepped apart instinctively, the charged moment between them dissolving into the icy air. Harry turned toward Ron, his heart sinking as he saw the tension etched across his friend's face. No, Harry said quickly, trying to keep his voice calm. We were just talking. Talking, Ron repeated, his eyes flicking between the two of them. His lips curled into a humorless smile. Right? That's what it looked like. Ron, Hermione said, her tone firm. What's your problem? My problem? Ron's voice rose, echoing slightly in the quiet of the garden. My problem is that I come out here and find you two sneaking off together like what? Hermione interrupted, crossing her arms. Go on, Ron. Say it. Ron hesitated, his face flushing angrily. Like you don't care how it looks. You're supposed to be my friends and you're out here. What? Whispering secrets? Laughing at me? Don't be ridiculous, Hermione snapped. No one's laughing at you. Ron's glare landed on Harry, who felt a spark of frustration rising. What's this really about, Ron? Harry asked, his voice quieter, but no less intense. Is it because I came to the ball with Hermione? Ron's jaw clenched. Maybe it is. You didn't even ask me how I felt about it. What does that have to do with anything? Hermione demanded. Harry and I came to the ball as friends. It has nothing to do with you. That's easy for you to say, Ron shot back. You're not the one being left out. Left out? Hermione's voice shook with disbelief. Ron, you've been sulking all night, and now you're blaming us because you didn't bother to find a date? The words hung in the air, sharper than any of them had expected. Ron's face reddened, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned on his heel and stormed back toward the castle, his footsteps crunching angrily in the snow. Hermione let out a frustrated sigh, her breath visible in the cold. Honestly, he's impossible sometimes. Harry remained silent, staring after Ron's retreating figure. Harry, Hermione said softly, drawing his attention back to her. Are you okay? He nodded slowly. Yeah. I don't want this to come between us. It won't, Hermione said firmly. He'll come around. He always does. Harry wished he shared her confidence, but the knot of unease in his chest refused to fade. Chapter 4. Breaking the Ice. The castle felt unusually quiet that morning. The buzz of the Yule Ball replaced with the hushed tones of students recovering from the late-night festivity. Harry and Hermione walked side by side, their boots crunching on the snow-covered grounds as they ventured toward the edge of the Forbidden Forest. The air was crisp, biting at Harry's cheeks as he adjusted his scarf. This was a good idea, he admitted, glancing at Hermione. Feels nice to get some air. Hermione smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I thought you might need it. You've had a lot on your mind. Harry nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Yeah, I keep thinking about Ron. I know we fight sometimes, but this feels different. It does, Hermione agreed quietly. But I don't think it's permanent. Ron, he just doesn't handle change well. Harry glanced at her. Change? Hermione hesitated, her breath visible in the cold. You and I. Us spending time together. I think it caught him off guard. Harry frowned. That's ridiculous. We've been friends for years. We have, Hermione said, her voice softer now. But I think he's realizing something about the way we connect. Harry stopped walking, turning to face her. What do you mean? Hermione's cheeks flushed, though it was unclear whether it was the cold or his question. I just mean, we understand each other in ways Ron doesn't always get. It's not a bad thing, but it might make him feel left out. Harry's brow furrowed as he processed her words. Do you think he's jealous? Maybe, Hermione said, meeting his gaze. But I think it's more than that. I think Ron's afraid of losing us, to each other. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Harry wasn't sure he was ready to unpack. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a loud rustling in the nearby trees interrupted them. Hermione tensed, her hand instinctively moving to her wand. What was that? Probably just Hagrid's latest, harmless pet, Harry said, trying to sound lighthearted. But he too reached for his wand, his eyes scanning the tree line. The rustling grew louder, and suddenly, a small, silvery creature darted out from the underbrush. It was no larger than a rabbit, its body shimmering like moonlight. It's beautiful, Hermione whispered, lowering her wand. The creature paused, its wide, glowing eyes meeting theirs before darting away into the forest. What do you think it was? Harry asked, his voice hushed. I'm not sure, Hermione said, her gaze lingering on the spot where the creature had disappeared. But it feels like a good omen, doesn't it? Harry nodded, though his thoughts were less on the creature and more on the warmth of Hermione's voice as she spoke. Later that evening, back in the Gryffindor common room, the atmosphere was tense. Ron sat in his usual spot by the fire, his arms crossed and his jaw set. Harry hesitated at the entrance, glancing at Hermione. Do you think we should talk to him? Hermione sighed. I suppose we should, but let's be careful. He's still hurt. As they approached, Ron's eyes flicked up to meet theirs. Well, if it isn't the dream team, he muttered. Run! Don't! Hermione said, her voice sharp but controlled. Don't what? Ron snapped. Don't call it like I see it. Call what? Harry interjected, his frustration bubbling to the surface. Ron, we're your friends. We've always been your friends. Doesn't feel like it, Ron said bitterly. Feels like I've been replaced. Hermione sat down across from him, her tone softening. Ron, that's not true. Harry and I went to the ball together as friends. That's all. Ron's gaze darted to Harry. Is that true? Of course it is, Harry said firmly, though the words felt heavier than he expected. Ron exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. All right, I'll believe you. But if I catch you sneaking off again... Ron, Hermione said, her voice laced with exasperation. All right, Ron said, raising his hand. Truce? Harry and Hermione exchanged a glance before nodding. Truce, they said in unison. But as they sat by the fire, the uneasy feeling in Harry's chest remained. Something about Ron's accusations had hit closer to home than he wanted to admit. Chapter 5. Shadows Between Us. The uneasy truce with Ron held, but only just. The days that followed the Yule Ball were marked by awkward silences and half-hearted attempts at conversation. While Harry and Hermione tried to carry on as usual, there was a tension between the trio that couldn't be ignored. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table during breakfast, picking at his toast as Ron rattled on about an upcoming Quidditch practice. Hermione sat beside him, engrossed in a copy of Hogwarts, a history, her silence louder than any argument they could have had. Harry glanced at her, then back at Ron. You're still up for keeper drills this afternoon, right? Yeah, Ron said through a mouthful of egg. As long as the weather holds. Can't stand playing in the rain. Hermione sighed loudly, snapping her book shut. Honestly, Ron, you'd think there's nothing more important than Quidditch. Ron turned to her, his brow furrowing. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Hermione said, her tone clipped, that there are other things worth discussing. Like, I don't know, the upcoming Transfiguration exam? Ron rolled his eyes. Of course you'd say that. All right, that's enough, Harry interjected, his voice firm. We don't need to start another row. Hermione gave Ron one last glare before standing up and gathering her things. I'll see you in class, Harry. Harry watched her leave, a knot of frustration tightening in his chest. Turning back to Ron, he said, Do you really have to keep pushing her buttons? Ron shrugged, his expression defensive. She pushes mine too, you know. Always has. Yeah, well, Harry muttered, standing up himself. It's getting old. He left Ron at the table, his appetite gone. Later that day, the library was quiet when Harry found Hermione, tucked away in a corner with her notes spread out across the table. She didn't look up when he approached, her quills scratching furiously against the parchment. "Mind if I sit?" Harry asked. Hermione glanced up, her expression softening when she saw him. "Of course not." Harry slid into the seat across from her, leaning his elbows on the table. "How's the studying going?" "Fine," she said, though the tension in her voice suggested otherwise. "Hermione," Harry said gently, "are you all right?" She hesitated, setting her quill down. "I'm fine. It's just Ron. He's been so difficult lately." Harry nodded. "Yeah, I think he's still upset about the ball." "It's more than that," Hermione said, her gaze dropping to the table. "I think he's upset about us." "Us?" Harry asked, his brow furrowing. Hermione looked up at him, her cheeks faintly pink. "He thinks there's something more going on between us." Harry opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss for words. Was there something more? The question had been nagging at him since the Yule Ball, but he hadn't dared to voice it. "What do you think?" Hermione asked softly. Harry's heart skipped a beat at the question. I don't know." "Do you?" Hermione's cheeks flushed deeper and she looked away. "I don't know either. But it feels like something's changed." The silence between them was heavy, charged with unspoken feeling. Harry's mind raced as he tried to make sense of his emotions. Hermione was his best friend, the person he trusted more than anyone. But lately, that trust had felt different, more intense. Before he could say anything, Madame Pince appeared at the end of the aisle, her stern gaze landing on them. "No loitering," she said sharply. Hermione cleared her throat, gathering her notes. "We should probably go." Harry nodded, standing up. "Yeah, let's. As they left the library together, the silence between them lingered, but it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt like the beginning of something they were both too afraid to name. That evening, the Gryffindor common room was warm and bustling, a stark contrast to the chill outside. Harry sat by the fire, his thoughts consumed by his earlier conversation with Hermione. He hadn't expected her to bring up the possibility of something more, and now the idea was all he could think about. Across the room, Ron was playing a game of wizard chess with Seamus, his attention firmly on the board. Harry felt a pang of guilt as he watched his friend. Ron didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this, whatever this was. Hermione appeared a moment later, settling into the armchair beside Harry. She didn't say anything, but her presence was enough to pull him from his thoughts. "Hey," he said, offering her a small smile. "Hey," she replied, her voice soft. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, the crackling of the fire filling the space between them. But then Hermione shifted in her seat, her gaze flicking toward him. "Harry," she said hesitantly, "about earlier." Harry turned to her, his heart racing. Yeah. I don't want things to get awkward between us," she said quickly. "You're my best friend." "That hasn't changed." "Me neither," Harry said, though his chest tightened at the words. Hermione smiled, and for a moment, the tension eased. But as she leaned back in her chair, her hand brushed against his, and the spark that passed between them left Harry wondering if things really hadn't changed after all.